The disaster of the Teutoburg Forest did not begin in the German woods of 09 CE. Its roots stretched back nearly half a century, into the turbulent days of Rome's civil wars, when a boy named Publius Quinctilius Varus was born into a family already falling into decline. His father, Sextus Quinctilius Varus, once held office as a quaestor minor, but respectable magistracy in the Republic. Yet his choice to stand against Julius Caesar in the final struggle between Caesar and the defenders of the Senate sealed the family's misfortune. Though pardoned by Caesar, Sextus later died by his own hand after the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE, when the forces of Brutus and Cassius were crushed by the triumvirs, Octavian and Mark Antony. That act left the young Publius fatherless, with his sisters and himself dependent on distant relatives for survival. Rome at this time was a world drenched in blood. Rival generals marched against each other. Massacres and proscriptions swept through the streets, and the Republic was collapsing. For a family like the Quinctilii, long obscure and without recent distinction, the prospect of revival seemed almost impossible. Their last consul had held office nearly 4 centuries earlier, back in 453 BCE. Young Varus, born between 46 and 44 BCE, grew up in this unstable atmosphere, knowing that the wrong choice of allegiance could destroy not just an individual, but an entire lineage. Despite this, Varus was not doomed. A relative, perhaps an uncle, likely ensured he received the proper education expected of a Roman noble, trained in rhetoric, law, and military basics. Varus emerged into adulthood just as Augustus, the former Octavian, began consolidating power as Rome's first princeps. By then, the civil wars were over. For the first time in decades, there was only one political faction worth serving, that of Augustus Caesar. Varus was thus spared the fate of many young men who were forced into civil war armies. Instead, he entered public service in the late 20s BCE, possibly beginning as a tribunus, a junior military officer. His ascent was not fueled by military genius or charisma, but by the careful navigation of political ties. Through his mother's probable connections to the Claudi Marcelli, Varus gained entry into circles that mattered, even serving alongside Marcus Claudius Marcellus in Spain during Augustus' final military campaign. It was there, most likely, that Augustus first noticed the steady, loyal young aristocrat. For Augustus, loyalty and administrative competence often mattered more than battlefield brilliance. And in Varus, he saw a man who could be trusted with responsibility. By 22 BCE, Varus had risen to the position of quaestor, echoing his father's old office, but in vastly different circumstances. He accompanied Augustus on an eastern tour between 22 and 19 BCE, traveling to Athens, Pergamon, and other cities. There, he handled finances, oversaw taxes, and managed local disputes. These were not glamorous tasks, but they impressed Augustus, who valued reliability. Step by step, Publius Quinctilius Varus clawed his way out of obscurity, determined to restore his family's honor. Yet destiny, though generous in those early years, had a cruel twist waiting. Varus' early service quickly proved the beginning of a steady climb. By the end of Augustus' eastern tour, Varus had built a reputation as an efficient administrator who understood the complex needs of the provinces. The princeps rewarded him with further offices, aedile then praeta. For a family that had not tasted political importance for centuries, this was a stunning reversal of fortune. Varus was not only a rising star, but proof that Augustus knew order could redeem forgotten houses. By 15 BCE, Varus emerged again in the historical record at the head of the 19th legion as its legatus legion. These were no ceremonial duties. The legions were engaged in campaigns led by Tiberius and Drusus in the Alps. Here, Varus gained military experience not as a daring commander, but as a competent officer who could maintain order and discipline. Among the troops. In 14 BCE, he made an alliance that elevated him even further. Varus married Vipsania Marcella, the daughter of Marcus Agrippa Augustus, most trusted general and right-hand man. This marriage suddenly tied Varus to the very core of imperial power. He became, through this union, connected to the family of Tiberius, Augustus' stepson, and eventual heir. The following year, 13 BCE, Varus reached the pinnacle of political life, the consul. He shared this office with Tiberius himself, a clear mark of honor. For a man from a family long consigned to obscurity, this was an extraordinary achievement. In less than 3 decades, Publius Quinctilius Varus had risen from the child of a disgraced father to one of the most prestigious posts in the empire. Yet this was also a turning point. With the death of Agrippa and the shifting tides of succession, Varus' fortunes became more precarious. His first wife, Vipsania Marcella, either died young or was divorced, leaving him without that vital marital tie. For a few years, little is recorded of his activities. It is likely that he continued to serve in various military and administrative posts, but he no longer enjoyed the same closeness to the ruling family. Nevertheless, Augustus still saw him as valuable. By 08 BCE, Varus was appointed governor of Africa, one of the empire's most important provinces, responsible for supplying Rome with grain. There are few records of his time there silence that may suggest he carried out his duties smoothly, without scandal or revolt. The following year, however, he was transferred to Syria, one of Rome's most volatile eastern provinces. There, he faced rebellion in Judea after the death of King Herod. Varus proved effective, if brutal, in restoring order. Jewish historian Josephus later recorded how Varus dealt firmly with the rebels, even crucifying many to set an example. Though harsh, such measures reassured Augustus that Varus was capable of keeping turbulent regions under control. By the time he left Syria, Varus was rich, powerful, and seemingly secure in Augustus' trust. But behind that image of success, critics whispered. Roman historian Velleius Paterculus accused him of greed and corruption. Though such charges were common slanders in Rome, still, these hints of arrogance and inflexibility would later echo with tragic force when he faced the German tribes. After his tenure in Syria, Publius Quinctilius Varus stood as one of the empire's most trusted administrators. By the first years of the new century, he had built a resume that would have seemed unimaginable for a man of his origins. Yet in Rome's highest circles, prestige could be as fragile as glass. Between 04 BCE and 01 BCE, Varus disappears from the record. This silence is telling. Augustus' favor was shifting. His grandsons, Gaius and Lucius Caesar, were being groomed as heirs, while Tiberius had voluntarily gone into exile on Rhodes. Varus, once bound to the Julian household through marriage, now stood adrift. His second marriage, to Claudia Pulchra, niece of Augustus and cousin of Tiberius, repaired those political ties. When Tiberius returned in 02 CE, once again, Varus was woven back into the imperial family's network. In these years, his reputation remained that of a stern, rigid governor. His rule in Africa had been competent, his suppression of revolt in Judea decisive. But there were hints of arrogance. Paterculus' accusation that Varus grew wealthy in Syria, whether true or not, revealed how he was perceived. Unlike men, such as Germanicus or Drusus, whose charisma could inspire troops, Varus projected authority by law, taxation, and intimidation. Augustus may have trusted him, but he was not beloved. Still, Augustus needed such men. By 07 CE, the emperor entrusted Varus with the most difficult frontier of all. For nearly 2 decades, Rome had pushed east of the Rhine, building forts, markets, and even Roman-style towns. The tribes had been subdued by campaigns under Drusus and Tiberius. Now, Augustus sought not merely conquest, but into Germania, into a province like Gaul or Spain. For that task, he chose Varus. At first glance, the appointment seemed reasonable. Varus was a seasoned governor, skilled in administration, and capable of enforcing Roman order. But the German frontier was not Syria or Africa. There were no cities accustomed to Roman taxation, no ancient aristocracies to negotiate with. The tribes valued independence fiercely, and their submission to Rome had always been shallow, maintained only by force. Varus, however, imposed Roman law as though Germania were already pacified. He collected taxes, imposed civic councils, and demanded compliance with Roman courts. To some tribes, this was humiliation. To others, a breaking point. The harshness with which Varus enforced Rome's will stoked resentment that had smoldered since the campaigns of Drusus. In his camp, however, Varus felt secure. He had 3 full legions at his disposal, the 17th, 18th, and 19th veterans of Rome's wars. He also had loyal Germanic allies, men who had been educated in Rome itself, chief among them Arminius of the Carusi. To Varus, Arminius was proof that Romanization worked. A man of noble birth who had been raised in Rome, granted citizenship, honored with equestrian status, and trained as a Roman officer. Arminius dined at Varus' table and spoke like a friend. But beneath that loyalty, the seeds of betrayal were already sown. Arminius was born around 18 BCE, the son of Segimerus, a chieftain of the Carusi tribe. When still a boy, He and his brother Flavus were sent to Rome as diplomatic hostages, a common practice meant to ensure their father's loyalty. There, Arminius received a Roman education. He learned Latin, military strategy, and the values of Roman discipline. He grew into a skilled cavalry officer, serving in campaigns in Armenia, and later in the brutal Illyrian revolt, where he earned distinction. Under Tiberius, Rome rewarded him with citizenship and the rank of equestrian, an extraordinary honor for a man born beyond the Rhine. By all appearances, Arminius was a loyal Roman client. He had everything a provincial aristocrat could dream of: prestige, wealth, and authority. Yet behind this facade, Arminius never forgot his heritage. He saw firsthand how Rome treated allies not as equals, but as subjects, useful only so long as they obeyed. The Illyrian revolt showed him how vulnerable Rome could be when faced with guerrilla tactics in rugged terrain. The lesson was clear: Rome's power was not invincible. When he returned to Germania, around 07 CE, Arminius was still in his 20s, but already a seasoned commander. To Varus, he appeared the perfect partner, Romanized chieftain who could mediate between the empire and the tribes. But in reality, Arminius was weaving a network of alliances, convincing his people that the time for rebellion had come. His motives were both personal and national. Segestes, another Germanic noble who remained loyal to Rome, had long opposed him and even forced his daughter to marry Arminius against her will. This feud deepened the rift between the pro-Roman and anti-Roman factions. But Arminius' ambition went far beyond family rivalries. He envisioned not just freedom for the Carusi, but a unification of the tribes under the banner of resistance. Over the years, 709 CE, Arminius carefully planned. He exploited Varus' arrogance, feeding him false reports of minor uprisings. He used his position as a trusted commander to move detachments, dispersing Roman forces across Germania, and he promised his fellow chiefs that Rome could be defeated if they struck together. By the summer of 09 CE, the trap was ready. Arminius told Varus of unrest in the north, and urged him to march with all 3 legions to suppress it. To Varus, this was routine. He believed the region pacified, the tribes loyal, confident. He allowed his legions to march not in battle readiness, but in a long column, weighed down by families, baggage, and supplies. It was not an army preparing for war, but an army on patrol. As they advanced into the dark woods of the Teutoburg Forest, the Romans believed they were heading to put down another minor disturbance. In reality, they were walking straight into Arminius' trap. The summer of 09 CE should have been uneventful. With the Illyrian revolt finally ended, Augustus looked to consolidate his northern frontier. Varus, accompanied by his 3 legions, and auxiliaries, nearly 20,000 men in total, marched into the heart of Germania. Alongside them trailed wives, children, merchants, and camp followers. Even their baggage train was unusually heavy, loaded not only with supplies, but with the trappings of Roman authority. To Varus, this march was no campaign. It was a show of power, a reminder to the tribes that Rome was present and unshakable. He placed his trust in Arminius, who advised him on the route and assured him of support. Even when Segestes, the rival chieftain, warned Varus of treachery, the Roman commander dismissed it. Arminius was a citizen, an equestrian, a man of honor. Segestes, by contrast, was politically motivated, jealous, and embroiled in feuds. Varus ignored the warning and sealed his fate. As the column wound deeper into the forest near Calcrease, discipline slipped. Soldiers mingled with civilians. Formations loosened. Scouts were few, if sent at all. Varus relied on his German allies to guide the way, unaware that those very allies had already joined the enemy. Then came the storm. Rain poured down, soaking armor, turning the roads into rivers of mud. Visibility dropped. The ground became treacherous, and the long line of soldiers stretched thin and vulnerable. It was at this moment that Arminius vanished. Excusing himself to gather reinforcements, he instead returned at the head of thousands of warriors from the Carusi, Bructeri, Chatti, and others. They had been waiting, concealed in the forest, ready to strike. What followed was no battle in the Roman sense. It was an ambush, carefully staged to exploit every weakness of a marching army caught in the wrong terrain. From behind earthen walls and dense thickets, spears and javelins rained down. War cries echoed through the trees. The legionaries, unable to form their lines, scrambled to defend themselves. The baggage train became an obstacle, civilians a liability. Every step forward was bloodied. Yet, for the moment, Varus did not collapse. He ordered his men to regroup on higher ground, forming a camp near Oberesh. Here, the Romans held firm, tending to the wounded and preparing to continue. For one night, hope survived, but Arminius had studied Rome well. He knew the legion's discipline could endure one day, perhaps two, but stretched over time. In terrain where order was impossible, their strength would break. The trap was only beginning to close. Day after day, the legions fought not against an enemy in the open, but against the forest itself. The second morning Varus abandoned the baggage train, ordering a forced march toward the Rhine. At first, progress seemed possible. The legions cut their way through trees, pushing toward open ground. But Arminius drove them into tighter paths, where marshes sucked at their feet and branches tore their formations apart. Attacks came in waves at hand-run strikes. Sudden volleys of missiles, then retreats into the trees. The Romans tried to counter with charges, but each time the forest swallowed them. Horses stumbled, shields tangled in branches, and men were cut down piecemeal. Wounded soldiers were left behind, their cries silenced by German blades. On the third day, the chaos deepened. Storms lashed the army, soaking weapons and armor. Exhaustion gnawed at the men. Still, they fought grimly, building another camp as night fell. But morale was collapsing. The proud legions, drilled for battle on open fields, had been reduced to a stumbling mob. By the fourth day, discipline snapped. The forest closed in once more. The German attacks intensified, and the Romans' cohesion dissolved. Arminius warriors, many of them trained in Roman tactics during their service as auxiliaries, struck with precision. Panic spread. Some soldiers surrendered only to be mutilated, gouged, tongues cut out, hands severed. Others chose suicide over capture. Varus himself, wounded and despairing, chose the Roman commander's grim final act. He fell on his sword. His senior officers followed. With their leaders dead, the remaining soldiers broke. Cavalry commander Vallanumonius tried to flee west with mounted men, abandoning the infantry, but he too was cut down. Only scattered survivors escaped to the Rhine, carrying news of disaster. The slaughter was total. Nearly 20,000 Romans lay dead in the forest. The eagles of the 17th, 18th, and 19th Legion's sacred standards that embodied Rome's honor were captured. The units were annihilated so thoroughly that their numbers were never restored in the Roman army. The Teutoburg Forest had become a graveyard. When word of the catastrophe reached Rome, the impact was seismic. Augustus, now in his 70s, was devastated. Suetonius records that he tore his clothes, banged his head against the walls, and cried out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." For the ruler of the greatest empire the world had ever seen, it was a moment of helpless grief. Panic swept the provinces. If Germania had risen, would Gaul follow? Would the Rhine frontier collapse entirely? Augustus ordered desperate measures. Estates were confiscated to fund the army. Men too old for service were recalled. Veterans were re-enlisted. Governors were told to remain at their posts, to reassure populations. Even games were offered to Jupiter, seeking divine protection. German immigrants in Rome were expelled from the city, their loyalty suspect. But the psychological wound was deeper still. Rome had believed itself invincible. It had crushed Carthage, subdued Greece, annexed Egypt. Yet in the mists of a foreign forest, barbarians had annihilated 3 entire legions. The myth of inevitable Roman victory was shattered. In Germania, Arminius became a hero. He tried to unite the tribes under his leadership, though rivalries persisted. Segestes, his old enemy, remained loyal to Rome and would later betray him. But for the moment, Arminius had shown that resistance was possible. Rome, of course, would respond. Tiberius secured the Rhine, preventing the revolt from spilling further west. In the years that followed, Germanicus Augustus, Granifu would lead massive campaigns of vengeance, recovering some of the lost eagles and inflicting heavy defeats on the tribes. Yet even Germanicus could not conquer Germania. The forest remained unconquered. The dream of turning Germania into another province died with Varus' legions. For centuries afterward, Teutoburg haunted Rome. The names of the 17th, 18th, and 19th were never given to legions, again a silent admission of the scar left on Roman pride. Arminius himself would later fall, betrayed by his own kin. But his victory ensured that Germania remained beyond Roman control. The Rhine, not the Elbe, became the empire's lasting frontier. The tragedy of Publius Quinctilius Varus was not only that he lost his life and his legions, it was that he had risen so high, against all odds, only to have his name remembered forever as a symbol of disaster. His story is a reminder of how arrogance, misplaced trust, and underestimation of others can undo even the mightiest empire. Rome endured, but Teutoburg was never forgotten. If you found this story gripping, subscribe and join us as we uncover more moments where history turned in the blink of an eye. And tell us in the comments, was Varus a victim of betrayal or a commander blind to the dangers he should have seen?